Hello, I'm Aaron Day from Make Crazy Days. Today, I'm going to make a baby rattle for some friends from church who are expecting in the next couple weeks. If you'd like to see how, keep watching. I started with an olive wood blank, which was about 2 inches square and maybe 8 inches long. A tenon was cut on one end, and then the blank was flipped for a tenon on the opposite end. Both ends will need a tenon, since later I'll be hollowing out a bulb for the rattle. And to do that, I'll be cutting the blank in half. With the tenons on both ends, the blank is then roughed out round. A parting tool is used to cut the blank in half about 1/3 of the way between the tenons. A 1/2-inch bit is used with a Jacob chuck in the tailstock to bore a hole to the depth of the bulb. A spindle gouge is used to widen the hole. It is used aggressively at first to remove a lot of material, as you can see. Then, as I near the final shape of the inside, I ease off and get smaller shavings, similar to a scraper. The parting tool is used to make a mortise, which will later help align the top and the bottom part of the bulb of the rattle. I use the same process for the bottom of the rattle, with the drill bit boring the initial hole. The tenon is cut on the bottom before hollowing the bulb. A couple test fits are done to make sure the mortise and tenon fit snugly. Once the mortise and tenon fit nicely, I work on hollowing out the lower portion of the bulb of the rattle. Again, a steady stream of chips indicates aggressive cutting. This sort of flow of chips is perhaps the most satisfying type of cuts on the lathe. The finer chips and more of a spray is indicative of a scraping action with the tool. And one more test fit to make sure I have a nice bulb. And now I can work on the outer shape of the rattle. I started with a skew, but didn't care much for how it was cutting and switched to a carbide tip tool. I worked the shape around the bulb portion down to a handle, trying to keep a constant thickness to the walls of the bulb. The carbide cutters really excel with removing large portions of wood quickly, especially when you can dive down into the wood, taking about 1/8 of an inch at a time. To clean up the less than awesome finish of the carbide tools, I switched back to a spindle gouge to do some more shaping of the outside of the bulb. But there is something to be said for the rounded radius bits for making a smooth transition between the handle and the bulb. I'm going to set the bottom portion of the rattle aside for now and work on the top of the bulb. The spindle gouge makes quick work of cutting the outer shape of the top of the bulb. I was getting a couple catches due to an odd burr on the tool at first, but a little cleanup with a file fixed that. Light scraping passes finished up the outer wall of the top of the bulb. Then, tilting the spindle gouge allowed me to get pretty close to parting the top off. Then I slowed the lathe down and used a parting tool to free it up. And sometimes I make mistakes. Here is the start of mine. Pressure fitting the top of the bulb onto the handle, I mounted that into the lathe. And here comes the inevitable result of my bad idea. A friction fit is not enough to try turning. There was a very slight stress crack in the wood, but not enough to see light through. I sealed it up by pressing CA glue around it on both sides and pressed it into the clamp the best I could. Next, CA glue was run around the tenon. A few nuts were loaded into the top and it was pressed into the bottom. There was a very slight wobble when I started turning again, so very light passes were taken to clean up the bulb and around the joint. The nuts inside the bulb made it wobble each time I restarted the lathe, so I avoided doing that as soon as I realized what was happening. I used the skew to draw up to the bulb, and then turned the skew flat to act as a scraper on the handle. Here you can see the wobble again as I start it. The nuts are resting in a different position inside the bulb again. But where I'm sanding, it isn't such a big deal that there's some wobble, as my finger pressure can keep the paper to the wood. I cleaned the dust off with some microfiber cloth and then applied a friction finish with the paper towel. The finish was applied a little down the handle, but I'll do that again when turning off the tenon in the chuck. Another piece is mounted into the chuck to create a jam chuck. The outer size of the bulb is measured, and the next smallest Forstner bit is selected for boring into the jam chuck blank. Then the jam chuck is cut to the width of the bulb so the rattle fits snugly. The rattle is slid into the jam chuck, and the tailstock is brought up with light pressure to center it. The carbide tool is used again to remove the old tenon from the handle of the rattle by diving it down close to the final depth. Then I switch back to the spindle gouge to get a smoother finish and do the final shaping. Some final sanding prep before I put the finish on the handle. At first, I thought of doing a beeswax finish, but I switched to the doctor's pen finish. Since children are not supposed to have honey, I don't know if that might be an issue. And there we have it, a finished baby rattle in olive wood. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you enjoyed it and share with your friends. As always, God bless.